Check, check. Hello, hello. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an episode of Critical Sick Chris on politics. This isn't going to be a long one today because I'm still sick. And as I speak on camera on this mic, I am sweating. Sweating. Not doing so hot. In case you haven't noticed, I haven't posted any videos this week because of the fact that I have been under the weather. It's too under the weather to work this week, so I was too under the weather to post videos, unfortunately. Job takes priority still at this point, so if I'm too quiet, please let me know. I apologize, but I can't talk very loud. Probably noticed my last couple of videos, if you saw them, that I was very quiet and very wasn't doing so hot. So haven't posted a video in over a week now, and this is my first time live in quite a while. But I have been working on the channel throughout the week on some back end stuff. I was doing some PHP coding, PHP and JavaScript, to try and help, and XML, to create a all-in-one RSS feed to get all of my content in one location. Makes it easier for research. Yep. Huh? What? Yep. Can I get a couple of bubblies, please? Sorry. Just making my announcement that I'm live, which I don't think anyone was expecting me to go live. Like I said, I don't know how long I'll be live today, probably. And my Sonics, please. I think they're... Thank you. Oh, they're right here. Never mind. Thank you to my lovely fiancée. She brought me my bubblies. Today, for real, if I don't get any viewers, then I'm probably just gonna end the stream, because, like I said, I'm sick. So I'm doing this for you guys, for whoever is watching, if anyone ends up watching. Oh, Polyworld flies. Hi, Julian. Or Polyworld. I thought I was on the road to recovery yesterday. Went and played hockey. Then I got home, and then I ate some food, and a weird thing happened. A very weird thing happened that I've never had happen. While I was eating the food had this crazy taste to it. It didn't taste rotten. It didn't taste like it was bad or anything, but there was this overwhelming taste in my mouth. It was like I couldn't place what the taste was. But having worked in the insurance restoration industry for many years, I realized just today that what it tastes like is like the smell you get when you walk into a house fire, a house that's been on fire. Like the soot. It tasted like soot from a house fire. And it was so strong, I had to force myself to eat that meal. It was the first solid meal I'd eaten in 4 or 5 days. Yeah, it was pretty brutal. but I forced myself to finish it. But after I finished it, I felt so nauseous. I was up all night trying not to throw up. And then, yeah, it was very weird. I've never had anything like that happen before. Why forced? Because I've been sick all week and I just didn't feel like being at the toilet all night throwing up. Yeah. So, I thought I was doing better. Played hockey. Felt good after hockey, but once I started eating my first solid meal, it was weird. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. Hopefully we get better soon. Sorry, Julian. I didn't know you were eating. Obviously, I didn't know you were eating. I'm assuming you're done eating now, though. Because of the conversation we just had. Welcome to Polyworld Flies. Thank you for joining. I apologize for the conversation. So I do have one viewer. That's cool. It says we got one. I think I might be able to get a couple more. The reason I actually decided I wasn't going to go live because, like I said, I'm still not feeling well, but there's been something unfolding in the House of Commons this week that I wanted to talk about, given that it's been a topic that I've touched on quite a bit since I started this channel. And given the most recent events, I thought I should probably do something on it, because I probably won't be releasing a video until next week, so might as well just get a live going and discuss it. But like I said, that's only if we get enough people. So I appreciate you being here, Polyworld, but I'd like to get a few more people on if we're gonna do anything. Oh, in the meantime, I will get the chat going, or not the chat, the call in, if anyone wants to call in. And I apologize in advance if sorry, I'm just creating an invite link for people who want to join. Where's my chat? There it is. For people who want to call in. Gonna pin this. I don't know how much. If anyone's calling in for a debate, I don't know if today's the day for that. Probably not going to be doing a debate. My brain's not functioning properly. So is it just you and I at the moment, Polyworld? Can I, anyone else there? We'll see. As per typical, I will give it about half an hour. Give it till about 8 o'clock. See if some people show up. And decide if we're going to do this today. I think my channel took a hit because I was doing quite well. Had a lot of people watching and stuff. And then last week I did a live. And in that live, I said some words that I forgot are not meant to be said on YouTube. I was reading out from the Justice Department in the U.S. They have the names of individuals who've committed crimes who've been deported out of the U.S. by ICE. And it lists the crimes that they've been charged with. And some of those crimes were pretty heinous. And I wasn't thinking, because I was sick, and I read out the crimes. And in those crimes are some names that YouTube flags. And I forgot to use the abbreviated fair use. Not fair use, that's a legal term, but the abbreviated words that are commonplace that do not go against the terms of service with YouTube. And so I think I might have gotten dinged for that. Live and you learn. All right. Still at 1. Yep, you learn. learning experience, new channel, new to the whole content creation world. So it'll become habit, hopefully, over time. Try not to forget. And that's why I ask that you guys in the chat respect the terms of service as well. Certain words, try and avoid using. Come up with fun words in their place. Or not fun words, sorry. Words that are appropriate. I myself don't believe in censoring what you say, but if I'm going to be on this platform, I have to abide by the rules of the platform. So I kindly request that you guys do as well. I know Polyworld Flies, you're good at it. Not that I would ever worry about you anyways, but we got two. Who's the second person on? I'm going to guess Critical Chris Fan 2.0. And if not that person, then it's probably Cat Allard. Can I get a confirmation on who this second person is? Let's minimize that. Open up that. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry, fiance's talking to me. She's taking care of me, as she always does. She's the best. Anyone who's looking for a fiance, find someone like mine. She's fantastic. Oh, Cynthia, welcome. Welcome to the chat. You might be interested in what I have to say today. And feel free to call in. Discord's right there. The link is right there if you want to call in and chat with me. I was just saying I'm probably not going to be doing a long one today because I'm still sick. And I wasn't going to go on to begin with, but there's some events that have transpired that made me feel as if I should, because I won't be recording a video for some time, probably till next week, till I get better. But I wanted to... Cynthia Carruthers. Yeah, I wanted to get this out as soon as possible because it's pretty interesting, pretty big one. And it touches on something that I've been doing a lot of research on to begin with and been talking a lot about, so might as well go with it. Yeah, no, that's 4 days from now. It would be 4 evening, like 4. Well, 3 days, 4 days including today. Like the ancient Near East Jews, they include the day that they include today as part of the day count. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Because I wouldn't release it until the evening anyways. As you can probably tell, I'm a little foggy. My brain's not quick. So I won't be doing any debating today. Or I could, but it's not going to go well for me. So yeah, this is a great day for anyone to come up and debate me if you want to, because you'll probably make me look like a fool. Just one sec. Dad said I shouldn't do this on screen, so. This is recommended as per my doctor. A little stimulant to get me going. Does Cynthia Carruthers want to come on and chat with me? Go through this together? My standard call-in? My go-to call-in? Holy, just spamming those emojis. Actually, it'd be kind of fun to show you what I've been working on this week. So I was saying before anyone arrived, this week, to take advantage of the fact that I was sick and I couldn't do any recordings or anything, I've been working on a lot of back-end stuff. I was doing some coding, PHP coding and JavaScript, and I was developing RSS feeds for sites that don't offer them, because a lot of the government sites don't offer RSS feeds. So what I was trying to do, and I'll just show you guys. Oh, I'll show you the code that I made. Boom. PHP here. I already edited it, but this is the PHP code that instructs a bridge I installed on my server, which you can get from GitHub. This is for anyone who wants to do this for themselves, by the way. So you go on GitHub, and there's a software that was developed that allows you to, it's called RSS Bridge. You create bridges that you can create your own RSS feeds for sites that don't allow them, or that don't have them, which blows my mind that government sites don't have them. An RSS feed is just it's essentially, it sends you updates to all the news that the site is putting out. A lot of sites have them, like news sites and stuff like that. But the bridge didn't have any bridges that functioned well with the sites I've been trying to create feeds for. So I had to create my own PHP file that I would then put into a bridge that I custom made myself, and then I would create the feed. And then these are the feeds that I spent this week working on, as you can see. So what they do, if I go to right here I've listed government departments. There's a lot more coming, because there's a lot of government departments. While I was doing this, I realized just how wasteful the government is, like how many unnecessary departments there are. Yeah, I did a lot because I spent, the last 7 days sitting at home doing nothing. And even when you're sick, you kind of go crazy if you're lying in bed for too long. So I'd lie in bed, I'd go crazy, and then I'd go on my computer, and then I'd start to feel too sick, and then I'd go in bed. It's just a never-ending cycle. But anyways, there's a lot of departments with, I realize there's just a ton of waste. So much like unnecessary departments that require a ton of funding. But now I have these news feeds. Each one of these I have to create a custom bridge. And so what I have to do, here I'll just show you so you go into this bridge, and so this is what I developed here, is this bridge. This one's easy because it's a part of the standardized site. So if I click on the Canadian Space Agency, I go here, I go down to the news, click news. For this one specifically, anything that starts with the domain canada.ca, I just gotta find this. I know this has nothing to do with politics, but I'm just waiting for people to show up. But so you just gotta find this word here, which is the department, plug that into here. So if I type in space agency, and then these are the different types of releases that they offer. So in here you can see there's news release, media advisories. And so this is what I did with the PHP file. And then you generate the feed. So I had to custom make this one for Canada's website, and then creates all the news that's been released. And then I turn that into an XML file, which this does automatically. It's actually an Atom file, but it basically turns into an XML. And then I add that to this with a plus button, and then as you can see down here, the Space Agency news is updated. It's fantastic, and it makes it so I don't have to constantly scour the internet looking for news. The news comes to me. And then there's another one that I made called Smart Scraper, because there's all these scrapers, but a lot of them don't work for the sites that I utilize. So you use the Smart Scraper like this. For the sites that don't start with the Canada domain, I'll just use this one temporarily, but you inspect, click on this, and then you find the div class. It would be the article class here. So you would type in under here. This is pretty boring stuff, I guess, but hey, waiting till I get some confirmation that people are here. Who else is here? Can I get Cynthia? Are you still here? And who's the third person? It's probably Kat. Anyways, so click the article. That's the div. So you do article. So you'd put the URL here, and then for the selector, you'd put article dot item, and then space A, because you're referencing that A there, which is the standardized HTML for link. And then, wait, there's two Cynthias? I'm confused. I thought Cynthia Carruthers was Cynthia Reed. My bad, Cynthia. There's two Cynthias here. I apologize, Cynthia Carruthers. I thought you were Cynthia Reed. I got you two mixed up. Okay, that's cool. I apologize for boring you with all this stuff. But anyways, so that's how I created this new system to gather my news. And yeah, that's what I've been doing all week. So now I have access to, if I click all feeds, I also do YouTube feeds for CPAC, and then there's a couple of other big names you guys should follow on YouTube that do Canadian content. I have them listed just so I can see what they're covering in case I miss anything. But yeah, these are all anything Canada related will come up here, and I'll be able to just go through everything and just see what I'm missing in terms of news. So pretty cool, pretty excited about that. It'll make my my process of research a lot more efficient. So yeah, very excited about that. Well, I guess we have enough people. Cynthia Reed, are you still here? Or did you just pop in and then leave again? Because if you're still here, maybe you can call in. Cynthia Carruthers, you're welcome to call in too, but Cynthia Reed, if you want to call in, feel free. Because then we can chat while I show you guys what I wanted to talk about today. The reason that I'm even doing a live. Because like I said, I wasn't going to do one. Cynthia Reed, you wanna hop on? We always love to hear your voice, don't we, chat? Oh, well, you're always welcome to call. You don't have to know anything about politics. You can just, tell me that what I'm not covering that you want me to cover, or ask questions if you're confused. But this one's kind of a doozy. Something I've been talking a lot about. Okay, I'm going to give it a couple minutes for someone to try and call in, and if not, I'll just go on my own. It's more fun when I'm talking to someone. Otherwise, I just feel like I'm talking to myself. Okay, she's not calling in. Polyworlds, do you want to call in? If not, that's okay. Okay, that's fine. Cynthia Carruthers. I apologize for getting you mixed up. I thought that the other Cynthia just changed her name. But I do recognize you from past chats, so I don't know who you are, but I appreciate you tuning in. Anyways, okay, I guess we'll go for it, though. We'll go for it. And again, I apologize for my, I'm kind of scatterbrained today because I'm foggy, super foggy. But as you guys are well aware, since I started this channel, one of the big things that I've been covering is Mark Carney's corruption. I'm just going to flat out say it. I'm going to call it corruption because that's what it is. His personal incentive to develop policies and trade and what's the word? See, I'm foggy. What is the word I'm looking for? His diplomatic relations around his personal assets. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because there was a development this week. The Ethics Committee has been talking a lot about conflict of interest. They've been meeting all week here. And one of the big things they've been talking about is conflict of interest. And as it stands, Carney works for Brookfield, not Canada, correct? Correct. As it stands, this is the Ethics Committee, currently composed of 5 Conservative MPs and 4 Liberal MPs. Now, you may not have known this, or maybe you have, some of you, but throughout the week, Carney has been pushing to, drawing a blank again, but he's pushing to essentially change the makeup of committees in the House of Commons. Normally, historically, the committees are built around the number of elected House members for any given party. So as you're aware, during the general election last year, there was a substantial amount of conservative MPs that were elected, and so the committees were built around that. Well, Carney is now saying that the committees, Carney and his ministry, have been saying that they should he wants to hide his corruption, correct. Well, this is what this is going to kind of emphasize here. He wants to reestablish the committees to represent the current makeup of the House, which, as we know, there is now 8 new Liberal members, 5 of which are floor crossers. So this is where we have unprecedented moves being made if they actually do this, because regardless of floor crossers, the committees are generally made up by the elected body, not by the floor crossing. So to reshape the committees would be an unelected, it would be a decision that goes against the general wishes of the constituents, because we elected a minority Liberal government. And when I say we, I mean Canada. The Canadian body, the Canadian constituents, elected a minority Liberal government, and the committees should reflect that. However, with the floor crossers, they're trying to push for a more Liberal-dominated committee makeup, which is what makes this so interesting. So, as I was saying, the Ethics Committee has been covering conflict of interest, particularly the Conflict of Interest Act, because, and I'm going to give the media some credit here, they're loading up the Liberal cabinet with some softball questions and stuff, and they're not pushing as hard as people would like. However, they have been asking Carney about his conflict of interests, as you said, Cynthia, Brookfield, primarily Brookfield. He has a lot more interest than just Brookfield, hundreds different companies, but primarily Brookfield. And they've been pushing him on that. And it's quite interesting because I made a video last week about his visit to Qatar and how there was a definitive conflict of interest there, given the investment from Brookfield and then his timing in visiting Qatar, despite there being really no diplomatic relations with Qatar historically, and the investments that we're pushing forward matching, aligning with Brookfield's just recent $20 billion investment. However, technically, given the law and how loose the bill is on the Conflict of Interest Act, it technically wouldn't be a conflict of interest because very few things would be. Yeah, there's lots. Cynthia says Brookfield, China, AUE, India. Correct. Yeah. There's very few things that would actually qualify as a conflict of interest, and even if it does, given the scale of the conflict of interest, he wouldn't even be reprimanded because it's only, hello, conflict of interest, or critical Chris Fan 2.0, welcome. Given the scale, it's actually only small conflict of interests that warrant any sort of repercussions, and the maximum penalty is a $500 fine. And remember that the starting salary for an MP is $219,000 a year, so it's akin to pennies. They're getting fined next to nothing for any conflict of interest, which there was just a Liberal MP who was recently fined, I believe. Feel free to fact check me, and I'll put that in the amendments if I'm wrong. But I believe they were fined. They were at least punished, or at least called out, I'll say. Anyways, major conflict of interest don't have any repercussions. The repercussions are left to the constituents and the media to call them out on, and that's it. It amounts to political sabotage if you get caught, which is why during Trudeau's administration, several ministers had to resign because of several cases of fraud that were occurring that Trudeau was a part of. He refused to resign, but several of his ministers had to resign. And that was probably political as well. He probably convinced them or forced them to resign. Neither here nor there. I'm going to lose track a lot today because I'm all over the place. But anyways, so the Ethics Committee has been discussing this, the Conflict of Interest Act itself, the lack of repercussions, They've been discussing, and a lot of the discussion has revolved around Mark Carney. And because it is also unprecedented that we have a prime minister with such a large scale of vested interests, particularly in a company the size of Brookfield. And so the topic at hand revolved around the fact that given how the Conflict of Interest Act is written, it would be almost impossible for Carney to do his job without recusing himself completely. The guns are down. I'm trying to redesign the studio. I haven't come up with a design yet, but given how it's designed, they just wouldn't be in frame. So I didn't bother. Unless I was to get a gun rack. Maybe I'll have them horizontally if that was the case. Hello, Cut Cub. Thank you for joining. Anyways, where was I? Does anyone want to... Like I said, I'm very foggy today, still sick, so could you remind me where I was before I answered that question? Maybe I won't read the chat actively unless I'm... Yeah, I'll turn that off for now. I'll do this if I'm chatting with you guys. Not to push you guys off to the side, but if I get caught in the chat, then I'll lose my train of thought and I won't be able to get back in because I am far too foggy. I'm a little bit dizzy, to be honest. But anyways, okay, so yes, the ethics committee was discussing Carney, and okay, so there. Don't worry about it, Critical Chris fan. It's okay. Yeah, Carney's conflict of interest and how the ethics committee was discussing it. So yeah, what they were basically talking about is given the scale of his vested interests, it would be next to impossible for him to commit to any of his duties without some sort of conflict occurring because of Brookfield and its size and its scope and how much it invests in. But they did also talk about Brookfield and how they have a lot of questionable practices that have been occurring, and that occurred also under Carney's tenure as well. One of which being the fact that they have been caught with tax evasion when they set up their I think they set up a tax shelter in the Caribbean. I'll look more into that. It's one of the things that I'm looking into. It takes a lot of time. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they set up a tax shelter in the Caribbean. And they said it was to protect their investors, but we all know why that occurred. That's an aside anyways. That's not really pertaining to the topic. But, yeah, so what the committee called for, though, is to recommend, and I will pull this up here. So this is the committee makeup, and this is the report that they released. And they've made some recommendations. So recommendation 10, these are all very similar, but Government of Canada amend the Conflict of Interest Act to require prime ministers to divest their controlled assets within 60 days of assuming office. What they're essentially saying is, because what he has to do now is he has to hand it over to a blind trust, which is what he's done. One of the problems with that, and I've mentioned this in the past, is that when you hand it over to a blind trust, given how the process occurs today, he gets to pick his own trust. It's approved by the commissioner, and I have a lot of qualms with the commissioner, and the commissioner in this report defends the prime minister. But yeah, so he has to pick his own trustee, and then he's allowed to give high-level instructions to the trustee as well. What that means is pretty vague, but he's basically allowed to instruct the trustee on a broad scale what he would like to see out of his investments. He's technically not supposed to be in contact with the trustee, but they talk about this in this report, and they discuss the fact that we have no way of knowing whether or not the prime minister is talking to the trustee, whether or not the prime minister actually has any ties to the trustee, because there's no process for that in our parliament. Now they insist that we have a gold standard. The commissioner himself, which he would because he's the ethics commissioner, insists that we have a gold standard when it comes to the process that we utilize. However, everyone is calling out the fact that it is filled with holes. So they've made this recommendation. Rather than using a trustee and the screening process where he selects his own screening board, and they're supposed to basically hold him accountable to any situation that would involve a conflict of interest, and say, hey, you can't partake in this. This is what's going on with Champagne right now, the Minister of Finance, who's currently going through a conflict of interest scenario himself because of his wife, and how much money is on what was it, 90 billion, probably going to go up, balloon up to $200 billion project in Canada, and she's the vice president of environment. So so there's supposed to be a screen in play that prevents them from partaking in that, but he chooses the individuals who are screening him. And as of now, we've seen numerous instances where a blatant conflict of interest could occur, and he has not been held accountable. Talking about Carney here. So the Ethics Committee has recommended that the Prime Minister be required to divest their controlled assets rather than placing it in a blind trust. The second thing, there's a few more here. So recommendation number 11, that the Government of Canada amend the Conflict of Interest Act to impose to whomever holds the position of Prime Minister of Canada or reporting public officer under the Act an obligation to sell all controlled assets. Now that's a big one, and I think Cynthia just said something about that. I'm going to read her chat in a second, but that's a big recommendation. And then recommendation number 12, ensure that for the application of subsection 27.1, as a reporting public officer is fully divested from their controlled assets through sale, since placement in a blind trust does not constitute true divestment, which is what I believe Cynthia just said. So that's huge. That is a massive recommendation sorry, I'm getting sidetracked mid-sentence, to completely amend the Conflict of Interest Act, which honestly, at that point, that would completely reshape the nature of Carney's position as Prime Minister. And then we'd be able to truly know whether or not his decisions that he's been acting on, which anyone who follows this even somewhat closely knows that that's what's happening. Every single move he's made, major and minor, has benefited Brookfield and his other investments. There's a guy who is another Canadian content creator who went a little bit deeper into the space agency announcement just this past week. And there's a lot there, and next week I'll be doing a video on that, which will be a little bit behind, but it'll cover that as well, because it's a big one. It basically shows that one of Carney's good friends from from college, is benefiting to the tunes of millions from what's going on with this. I'm going to put it in quotes here, the space agency in Canada. But yeah, that's huge. But what makes it even bigger is the fact that the timing of all this. So as the Ethics Committee is going over all of this, at the exact same time, Carney's cabinet starts coming out and saying, hey, we need to reform committees to reflect the current state of the House. So we need to adjust who's in them, which essentially amounts to less conservative representation in the committees. And in case you guys weren't aware, the way that bills work... Can you look into the space? Okay, I'm going to chat with you guys for a sec, and then we'll go into committees. Just remind me, committees and how they work. Okay, so what's the chat here? Do I think that Conor McGregor will be able to get the Oilers past the Ducks tonight? Oh, that was a good one. Yeah, that was pretty funny. When I saw that, I didn't have a video on it, but I had to make a short right then and there because it was just too funny that a sitting MP doesn't even know who the captain of the Edmonton Oilers is. And as some would claim, I'm not going to make the claim myself because I don't want to get into it, but is the greatest player on planet Earth and doesn't know who he is. and instead named a UFC fighter. And what was funny was the irony behind the fact that he was saying that Pierre Poilievre calling out Carney's economic policy would be akin to calling out McGregor's ability to play in the NHL. And it's so funny because that would be a fair call. I think anyone would be fair to question whether or not Carney or McGregor would be capable of holding his own in the NHL, or the decision making that he would make while playing in the NHL. So it's just a little bit of irony there, because I think that as much as I criticize Pierre, I'm to those who don't know, I'm not a huge Pierre Poilievre fan. I think that he's quite soft on a lot of things that I would like to see him push harder on. That being said, I do agree with a lot of the stuff he says, but I don't ever blindly follow anyone just because of their politic. So there's some things that I like about Pierre, and there's some things that I don't like. But I do agree with what he's been pushing on economically when it comes to Carney. And I think he's been hitting the nail on the head on that. So, and he's been talking, I think he's been pushing more and more on that, to be honest. Maxime Bernier. Yeah, I got some problems with him too. I agree with a lot of the policies he's been pushing, but I got some problems with him too. To be quite honest, to get a little sidetracked here, there's not a single politician or party that I'm 100% behind. If I had to vote today, I have no shame in admitting that I would vote conservative. But that's mainly out of just out of lack of options. But if you could blend some of the I'm drawing a blank right now. Being sick sucks. If you could blend the People's Party of Canada, some of their policies, with the Conservative Party, and remove some of the global influence on the Conservative Party, I think I'd be a happy camper. Best of all evils. Yeah, exactly. Anyways, let me go down the chat a little bit more. So yeah, that's how I feel about the McGregor thing. It was quite funny. It was too funny to pass up on. Picking his puppets, not sure what that's referring to. Oh, picking his puppets for committees? Yeah, I agree. Isn't that the opposite of blind? Yes, it is. And that's what people have been criticizing. Cynthia Reed says, isn't that the opposite of blind? I'm guessing she's referring to when I was talking about blind trust. Yes. Which is why Cynthia Carruthers, just below that, says there's no such thing as a blind trust. He should be selling off his investments, and then his trustee can invest for him, and he would not know what he is invested in. Yeah, you could do that. I personally think we should go a step further and just force them to hold cash. If you're the Prime Minister of Canada, you should have faith in our country, and you should have faith in the strength of our dollar. And if you're forced to hold cash as a public servant, and, well, one, that forces you to not want to be a public servant for too long, because no person would want to hold cash for decades. That would be a terrible, terrible investment decision. However, I gotta go have dessert, so I'll be back in a bit. There's pie. Fantastic. Thanks for coming out, Cut Cub. But however, if you're forced to hold cash, that puts you in a position. What did cash do to you? That puts you in a position where you have to maintain the strength of our dollar, whether that's against other currencies or preventing inflation. I think that would be a great way to force public servants to put Canada first, as Carney says he does, which he doesn't. Put our country and our economy first. So yeah, I think you're on the right track there with selling off his investments, which is what the Ethics Committee has recommended. But yeah, the cash thing, I think, would be the best way to go. And that would show that they're a true public servant who cares about what's going on. And I think that would eliminate a lot of the lobbying and the backdoor deals that we've seen from the Liberal government over the last 15 years. Or 10 years, sorry. How do you feel about the space program? So I brought that up just a minute ago. I was talking, I think you were there for that, the Canadian space program. Yeah, Critical Chris asked, Fan 2.0 asks me about how I feel about that. There's a lot in there, and I think I'll put a whole video towards that. I wasn't planning on talking about that too much. I didn't want this to be a super long chat today, or a long live, because, like I said, I'm quite sick still, and I'm foggy. But lobbying should not be allowed. I agree. Stop getting off topic. It's okay. People can chat about what they want. I'm just gonna try not to read it while I'm going over stuff. But I pretty much covered that, so we can go on with just chatting now, and that's perfectly fine. Can I look into the space agency nonsense? I mean, I can dive into it a little bit. You'll just have to be patient with me while I pull stuff up. I can try and cover a little bit of what happened. The thing is, I just don't, I'm not as familiar with it, because when it was announced, I was sick, and so I haven't been going into the news as much as I normally do, so I just don't want to say something that's false. I've watched some stuff, and I've looked into some reports on it and stuff, but my memory is just not quite where it normally is, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. Greatest player in the world, Cut Cub says. I'm assuming Cut Cub is an Edmonton fan. Not to get too much into hockey, but I think he's the greatest offensive player in the world. I'll just say that. Best of all evils. Okay, so I think we're caught up. Critical Chris fan, the good point. Give them cash and not investments. Correct. Yeah. I think if you force them to hold on to cash, then there's no incentive for any activities. Because the thing is, even with a trustee, if they can invest for him, he still knows who the trustee is. Or there's ways for him. There's always, if you give them a door for corruption to occur, that door will always be utilized. Oh, so there's one in Newfoundland. Okay, thanks, Cynthia. I didn't know about that. So the one in Nova Scotia is the one that I was reading about then. The one with the, oh man. Cut Cub really wants to turn this into a hockey chat. Maybe in a little bit later we'll go into hockey. That'd be fine, considering it's playoffs and all. But anyway, so Cynthia Carruthers said that there's one in Nova Scotia and one in Newfoundland. So see, this is a perfect example. I'm not as in tune as I normally would be. But yeah, I didn't even know about the Newfoundland one. But what I'll do is I will dive into that and I'll research it. The one in Nova Scotia has enough on its own. One thing I will say, so there was an announcement made that they're going to invest, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's billions. I believe it amounts to billions of dollars in a Canadian space agency, which they want to basically launch from Canada so that we're not relying on the U.S. Everything that Carney is doing is trying to divert Canada from the U.S., which ultimately helps him because Brookfield is heavily invested in U.S. So with Canada hurting, Brookfield does well, and Carney does well. It's not directly going through Brookfield, but it's helping a friend of his. So this is what I'll try and explain it. So there's a couple of companies that have historically been involved with the space agency. They've been the primary contractors for the space agency, and the first of which is a company that's owned by a friend of Carney's. And I have no problem saying this even without having all the information at hand, because this is all publicly available. And so this individual was on the verge of going bankrupt through this company. $200 billion. Thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, they've $200 billion they've said they're going to invest. So this friend of Carney's owns the first company. It has an M in it. It's an acronym. I can't remember what it stands for. ML something maybe. I can't remember. But anyways, so while on the verge of going bankrupt, the Canadian government funded them. What was it? It was either in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to help them get out of solvency. And then literally the next week or something, the owner of the company, who is Carney's friend, decided that it would be a good time to invest, I think it was over $1 million in stock options right after, being on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. But anyways, so one of the main things about this, the Canadian version of Starlink, yeah, so they say. So one of the things about this, though, is the fact that, so they're on the verge of declaring bankruptcy, but so the province of Nova Scotia, I believe, leases the land to this company, or one of the two companies. I can't remember which. And then that land and they're leasing it to the company for like $16,000. And I can't remember how much the lease. So the company is leasing the space program. They're now leasing the portion of the land. Yeah, 100% money laundering. They're leasing the portion of the land that is being used for the space agency back to the Canadian government for millions of dollars. So it's being leased from the provincial government for several thousand into the company, and then the company's leasing it back to the Canadian government for millions. So yeah, it's a money laundering scheme, 100%. And this is all verifiable. You can look this up. I don't know the numbers. I don't know the details. That's the stuff that I don't know. But what I do know is that is happening. And that's where the scam is when it comes to the space agency. That's where the incentive is. If you're looking for an incentive, that's what it is. It has to do with these two companies and their relationship to Carney. Not just Carney, but because when I say Carney, I'm not just talking about him. There's several people that stand to benefit from things like this all the time, because they're all, anyone who's in that industry, they all know each other. They're all friends, and they all stand to gain. But that's primarily where it stems from. I don't know anything about the Newfoundland one. Maybe next Friday I'll be able to talk about that once I've looked into it. And that's kind of the extent of where I'm at with the space agency thing. There's a couple of good videos on that where they do have sources, where they go further into it that are already released, and I would recommend you guys go watch them. Let me pull up my news feed. Let's see. We'll recommend the channel. I'm always going to recommend other channels. I'm not the kind of person where it's like, you have to watch me, you can't watch anyone else, because these guys are good. And so it's The Right Call is the channel. I highly recommend you watch his video on the space agency. And then I always recommend double checking sources. For anyone who I don't know who's following me or watching me, I don't ever recommend you just take what people like me say at our word. That's why I try to provide sources for all of my videos, and usually legitimate sources. So I'm not just going to use Rebel News. As much as, I do respect Rebel News and what they do, or Juno News and stuff. Legitimate sources help your case, and they help your position when you're talking to people about these kind of things. Because if you're just using sources that you follow that are biased, even if they're correct, if they're biased, people will throw that in your face, and you have no leg to stand on, no ground to stand on. So try and back that up with sources. But yeah, so that video is good, and feel free to fact check him. But yeah, the Right Call, I believe it's a guy from Quebec, French guy, Elliot, I'm going to butcher this, Daigneux, Daigneux. Fantastic video on that. And I'll be making one of my own. Hopefully I have some additional content to bring to the table so that you guys will watch. And then, yeah, I'll cover the Newfoundland one as well. But that's all I have on the space agency thing right now. And to tie that back into the ethics committee. So we'll go back to the ethics committee. So what I was saying was that I find it very interesting that the exact same time that the ethics committee is proposing completely reshaping how the Conflict of Interest Act functions, Carney's government is proposing a restructuring of committees. And if you think that wouldn't involve the ethics committee being restructured so that there's liberal majority, you would be sadly mistaken. And the Conservatives are pointing this out. They've been doing press conferences, press releases all week talking about this. How this is it's completely unprecedented to reshape committees without going against the elected body or the elected MP, the House, going against what was elected, and to shape it based on the floor crossers. That just doesn't happen. And then B, the fact that the timing of all this is pretty crazy, given that there's a ton of other stuff that should be focused on. Primarily, the fact that the UCMSA, or is it Kuzma or whatever, which it's two different. They have two different titles depending on who's. The U.S. has its USMCA, I think, and then Canada's Kuzma. It's our trade deal with the U.S., and that's pretty important. What I think is hilarious is that they've just created a whole new government body to work on that, when Carney's entire campaign, and if you go back and watch his election promises when he was going through the election, the entire campaign was built on Carney promising that sorry, brain fog. On Carney promising that he would get a deal done by July of last year with the Trump administration, and everything is pointed to the fact that Carney, and I will give credit to Ford here as well. Ford has not helped, and he's currently doing more to make it harder. He doesn't want any trade with America. He's made that clear. Every speech he does talks about how we have to, basically pushing for the New World Order and saying that the U.S. is going to fall behind, and he wants to push us alongside India, China, primarily China, which is just absolutely crazy, especially considering China is in for a world of hurt, given that they've been hit hard. Their interests have been hit hard over the last several months. Maiden Lansard, welcome. Could a highly intelligent octopus qualify to hold public office under the current laws? You know what's funny is that octopuses are actually extremely intelligent to begin with, and if you could teach them to speak, I'd be more inclined to trust an octopus over current politicians in office. So it's a funny question, and yeah, I would trust an octopus over a politician. If penguins had a democratic system, oh man, we're going into animals now, had a democratic system, would they vote on fish distribution or ice territory? Both. What are you guys doing? Are you guys trolling? Am I going to have to monitor the chat? Because you're distracting me with this nonsense. I got people who are actually trying to listen to stuff and have a conversation. You guys are talking about animals. The first question was, this is a coordinated attack on the integrity of the chat. What are you guys doing here? How many raccoons do you think it would take to run a small town government? Well, they're very communal, so they already have established hierarchy. So, and see, now I've completely lost my train of thought. Does anyone want to help me get back on here? Because I've completely lost you guys know I'm sick, right? Like I can't focus enough as it is. And I got you guys talking about animals and their ability to run. You want to talk about smart animals? Talk about orcas. I could talk about that for hours. Oh yeah, the reshaping of committees, and then about trade with Trump or with the U.S. So yeah, even the media, which I give them credit for, are pointing out the fact that Carney is essentially failing at his promise, because he promised that he would have a deal in place by last year. And the Kuzma deal, the way it functions, I've talked about this before. There's I'm drawing a blank on the word. I'll just call it a caveat that was made in the deal. And I on my last live, I think I actually went into the deal and read it out for you guys, which is great because it was hilarious, because there was, or maybe it wasn't a live, maybe I did it on an actual recorded video, but it was hilarious because I was talking about this and the next day it was brought up. So I was like, yes, I was on the right track there. But this caveat basically calls for interested parties are allowed to essentially end the deal. And if that deal ends and Canada doesn't come up with a trade deal with the U.S., given the position that the U.S. has on the global trade right now, we are going to be screwed. And one thing that Pete, what's his name, Hegstra, mentioned when he was doing an interview last week with Jasmine Lane, he's the diplomat for the U.S. He's a Canadian diplomat for the U.S. Or is it vice versa? Whatever. He was mentioning the fact that when you're talking about expanding trade beyond the U.S., it's not like you can just go to a country and be like, hey, let's trade now. Countries around the world have established trade partners. They have established infrastructure. The companies within those countries have established sales pipelines. You don't just go into a country and be like, hey, we're going to be your trading partner now. It takes years and years and years to establish new trade partnerships, because you don't just have to convince the government. You have to convince the companies within the country to say, hey, this is a better deal for us, or this is going to work better for us. But when you have your infrastructure and everything's already established for a certain trade partner, companies aren't just going to be like, oh, they're going to charge us less, or they're not going to charge us tariffs. We're going to go with them. When you have billions and billions, like, trade amounts to a huge portion of industry. Like, all industry relies on trade. So if you have your infrastructure established, let's say a country in Europe has infrastructure established for trade with somewhere in Asia, let's say Thailand, and they've spent billions, if not trillions of dollars establishing infrastructure and sales pipelines, companies within the country establishing sales pipelines meant so that trade with that country can function as efficiently as possible. And then you have another country that comes in and is like, hey, we'll trade with you. They're not just going to say yes off the bat. They might say, like, this is where the MOUs come in with Carney. He goes to these countries and he says, oh, I've established an MOU. An MOU is nothing more than a politician saying, oh, yeah, it'd be nice to trade with you. And that's basically what Carney's done. He hasn't come up with a single trade deal in his time in office. And nothing's going to come of them. Because another thing to consider, too, is when you come in and establish a new trade partnership, you're pushing someone else out. So by creating a trade partnership, let's say they create a trade partnership with Germany, the country that they were previously trading with for whatever thing that they're talking about, that country has now been sidelined, and you've now hurt your diplomatic relations with that country because you've hurt their economy. So that causes a lot of problems, and it's not as simple as that. So the term divesting, I like that, because divesting away from the U.S. is not something. No one's going to trust Canada in any trade deal until we prove that we can be correct, until we can be reliable. And when the U.S. is our strongest trade partner, and the U.S. has made it very clear they want to work with us, they just want a fair deal. I made a video on this last week. You guys can watch it. When they've established that they want to work with us, that they've tried to work with us, and that we've sabotaged any deal that we could have with them, and they're our strongest trade partner, what country is going to want to work with us? That's just not going to happen. So, yeah, Carney's done everything he can to, screw this country over. With his rhetoric, with his desire. Like, Pete Hegstra, the person I was talking about before, the diplomat, has said that there hasn't been a serious trade discussion since October. Basically since Doug Ford made that ad about the tariffs in the U.S., which is so stupid. And he's doing it again now. He's talking to CNN, probably as we speak, or maybe he's already done it. And he's doing everything he can to sabotage things as well. And then we just found out that there's... So the price of groceries has been, skyrocketing, inflation and all that kind of stuff because of the trade dispute. And what's interesting about that is the fact that the U.S. has now come out and said in, I believe it was a Senate hearing, don't quote me on that, that the trade that we normally have with the U.S. regarding importing agriculture, like fruits and vegetables and things like that, Canada has been blocking their entry, which has been driving up the cost of our groceries, our disposable goods, things like vegetables and fruits. And so everything's been blamed on the U.S. when in reality, we're the ones that are harming ourselves here. It's like everywhere you look, Canada's been harming ourselves when it comes to importing trade. And then you can't even just blame the U.S. I mean, countries, if there's one thing that we could establish trade relations around the world for, and this is something that Poilievre's talked about, it's LNG. Countries have been begging us, Japan, Germany, was it Australia? No, I think they have their own. But anyways, there's countries around the world who've been coming to Canada begging for us to sell them natural gas, because we are one of the largest producers of natural gas on Earth, if not the largest. And we've turned them all down because we want to be environmentally friendly, and so they've gone elsewhere. And that could be a huge driver of our economy. And we could have invested in the infrastructure, and in fact, there's been pushes for it from companies and stuff. But the industrial carbon tax, as Cynthia Carruthers has pointed out, is now at $110. it has made it so it's not feasible for anyone to invest any private dollars into these industries. The one pipeline that Carney promised would get built has now been backshelved. First of all, nothing was pushed on it on their end, on the government's end, in terms of them looking into the investment. He's made unrealistic demands in terms of what has to occur. So basically what's happened is the Canadian government said they would approve and fund a pipeline to the Pacific coast, which would allow us to get oil out to Asia and Europe, if certain conditions were met. And so there was a deadline for that. The deadline has come and gone. And basically that whole thing has fallen apart. And then the one company that could afford it has basically said, we can't do it. We can't build this because there's so many criteria that need to be met that cost far too much, that the cost-benefit analysis just wasn't there. I know we ship fuel using more fuels than if we were to use our own fuel. Correct. But yeah, the cost-benefit analysis on that pipeline is just not there. So the company basically said, we're not going to do it because we can't do it because we can't afford it. And then not only that, there was other things too they had to hit in terms of criteria. They had to basically satisfy every single any band that they affected, any native indigenous band that they affected, they would have to satisfy their requests on top of the environmental requests. Oh, and they also had to approve carbon capture, which would have cost to the tune of billions of dollars to establish, without any guarantee that it would even work because it's never been developed before. And then also they'd have to eat that cost. And it's just like crazy demands, which is funny because that goes into a whole other thing because Carney through Brookfield is actually invested in carbon capture technology. So that just opened a whole other door to a complete other thing. But needless to say, the whole trade atmosphere around Canada has been a complete gong show, and I think it's purposefully been done because it's stupid. Okay, yeah. So it's just where we're at right now with that, and then what's happening with the committees. Yeah, bad times. That's kind of where I'm at with that stuff. You guys have anything else you want to say? Any questions about that? Or is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Because I kind of lost my train of thought here. So I think I've covered it quite extensively. I just had a complete, Yes, I agree, Cynthia. The climate scam has cost the world $10 trillion and counting. I don't know about the exact amount. For now, I'll take you on your word on that. I'd be willing to bet it's far more than that. There's a reason that more and more countries are pulling away from the Paris Accords, and they're pulling away from these environmental, environmental conditions that they have on the industry. Canada is one of the only countries that is still pushing that whole environmental thing. And I guess I could get into the climate. I personally, I do think the climate is changing, but I'm going to say this. The climate has always been changing since time immemorial. It's been changing since day one. The Earth has never been stagnant in terms of climate. The atmospheric makeup has constantly been changing. It's not just what we do here on Earth that affects the climate. The sun affects the climate. Our position around the sun affects the climate. Our position around the planets affects the climate. There's so many variables that affect the climate. This is where Friends of Science. Okay, thank you for the source. I appreciate that. 10 trillion from Friends of Science. Okay, I'll look into that. But yeah, there's so many things that affect the climate. That this whole, and you know what's interesting about it too is that this has been happening for decades, since the 60s, the 50s or the 60s. They've been pushing this, and it's always been about control. It's always been about a certain number of individuals having control over economic decisions and using the climate as the source of that. Like I said, I don't think that amounts to the climate not changing. I do think climate change is real. What I think is fabricated is this idea that we have any claim to understand what is happening with the climate. I mean, if you go by decade, I'm going to do a video on this in the future, because the whole climate thing, as soon as you get into the climate thing, then people put you into the realm of conspiracy. But historically, the claims about the climate have constantly... Remember back in the day, what was the first thing that they said? It was like, first it was global cooling. And then the next big thing was, what was it? Acid rain was going to end the world. And then what was another thing? Try and list them off with me here. So there was global cooling was the big one. And then it was acid rain. And then what was it? Global flooding. And then, that all the plant life was going to die, which is funny because the world is greener than it's been in recorded history. Because with more CO2 comes more plant life, which decreases the amount of CO2. But anyways, creates a, and then it was global warming, which started with the Al Gore thing. And everything that he predicted has not come true, by the way. In fact, anything that has ever been predicted in terms of climate change has not been true. And now, to adjust for that, rather than making a claim about what's going to happen with the climate, they've completely changed it. I don't know if you've noticed this over the last 5-10 years. They've completely... it used to be global warming. When we were younger, it was global warming. That was the thing that was happening, definitively, global warming. But then they realized that that's not happening universally. Some areas are getting hotter, for sure. And I think the global temperature has increased by like point something of a degree, which doesn't really amount to, like, in terms of what's causing that. You can't definitively say that it's CO2. Chemtrails. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about that. That's something beyond what I'm willing to claim. Like I said, I don't like to just throw stuff like that out there. What I will say, though, is that it went from global warming was the last major one to they've just given up on trying to decide what's going to happen. And instead now it's just climate change. You ever notice that? When you say from a vague perspective that it's climate change, you can then use that for anything, any sort of catastrophe that occurs. You can say, like when I was living in BC, there was some heavy rain in conjunction with the I can't remember what it was. There was something that caused flooding in the Fraser Valley, and they called it an atmospheric river, and they made such a big deal about it. Yes, it was a pretty bad flood, and there was a lot of damage done, and there was a lot of property damage and a lot of money lost there. But they used the term atmospheric river, and the way the media was pushing it, yeah, I'm sure you could. I used to be huge into the climate change stuff, and rather than looking into the whole their side of things, what I was looking into was the patterns. What I actually used to do was I would go to all the weather stations that I could. I think I had an Excel spreadsheet that I actually just recently deleted because I didn't think I was going to be getting back into the climate change talk anytime soon, but I recently deleted it. And what I did is I went over the weather stations and their reports from as far back as I could possibly go, and I would cover increments for each station, and I would post it on an Excel spreadsheet, and then I would create charts and stuff like that to take a look at things. But dang it, I lost my train of thought again. But anyways, yeah, I think that had to do with me saying that the Earth has incrementally increased in temperature a little bit. But one thing I wanted to touch on that is that one thing they don't tell you is that when these weather stations first came to be, they were usually remote. They were pretty remote. They were in areas that were like there was one I was looking at. I can't remember. It was in the States somewhere. And when that weather station was developed, it was in a rural community. And then a city developed around it. And what we do know with certainty is that cities are hotter than rural areas or natural areas like forests and stuff like that. And that's just basic physics. And we know how that works and why that works. But one thing, too, that needs to be noted is there's far more urban areas. And a lot of these weather stations that have had their annual their temperature increases, no one's talked about the fact that those temperature increases are partially due to the fact that you have rural and natural areas that used to record temperatures that are now urban. And so there's been a slight increase of, let's say, on average, one degree or half a degree. And they'll say that that's drastic and all that kind of stuff, but they're not accounting for the fact that they're now in an area that would be hotter naturally because they're in a city. You could have New York City and then upstate New York, and they're only an hour away from each other, and they'll have significant temperature changes. And then also, like, there's so many things you could look at when it comes to that. Also, the method of how to record temperature, like what we use now compared to what we used to use. I mean, we used to just use old school mercury thermometers. Now everything's digital, and the way we read things is different. So the accuracy and the consistency of recording these things, I think it's there's such a large variability there that you couldn't even definitively say that the Earth is necessarily heating up. Although even if that is the case, I'm not necessarily saying it's not, but how do you attribute that specifically to one thing? Point being, any disaster, where I got off trail, what I was saying is any disaster can now be used as an excuse for climate change and climate change policies. And Canada has been very strong on that, what with the fires we've been having over the last few years. You ever notice that if you look at the count, you go to the Canadian website, can't remember which department's in charge of it, but whoever's in charge of fire mitigation and investment in that. And Trudeau was supposed to invest, a ton of money into fire mitigation. He was supposed to invest in water tankers and all that kind of stuff. One thing that they don't look at too is the fact that, so we had all these forest fires, the higher number of forest fires over the last, or maybe not even number of forest fires, but acreage burned or whatever, over the last few years compared to the past. Well, one thing we stopped doing is fires are natural, we need them. Yeah, correct. But one thing we stopped doing, though, that we used to do, is we used to manage forests. We used to manage deadfall, dry wood, undergrowth, things like that, to try and help. Because, fires are necessary, especially out west. There's tree species that will not even reproduce until a fire allows them to reproduce. So fires are needed for it. But one thing we used to do was we used to manage these forests, and we stopped investing in that, and we no longer manage these forests. So that's one thing. But one thing that I want to point out is if you go to that website, you'll notice that they track the amount of fires and the hectares covered, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that you have, the year before COVID, the year before the immense lockdowns that we faced, there was quite a bit of fires. And then the year of COVID, fires disappeared. There was like next to zero forest fires. And then following that, the fires started ramping up and ramping up and ramping up. And then you had all these situations where there was cases of like definitive arson. And then the media at the time were saying like, climate change, climate change, climate change. And then policies were being implemented based around climate change, climate change, climate change. But what they weren't saying is that these people were arsonists. And some people claimed, and I'm not going to make this claim, but some people claimed that this was intentional arson to help with the climate change position. The amount of arson definitely has gone up, and there's definitely some major fires out in BC for sure that were arson. But a lot of it's stupidity too, and a lot of it has to do with, we have 16 million more people living in this country than we did 20 years ago, and you just see the level of stupidity when it comes to fire, or let's say knowledge of living in the woods and fire knowledge and all that kind of stuff. And I saw it myself one time. Now, this is anecdotal, but we were in BC and there was a fire ban because there was fires all over the place. It was a couple of years ago when fires were at their worst. And we were camping at a lake that you had to go over moguls to get there. You had to have a 4x4 to get there because they blocked all the roads off because they didn't want people going in there. And we were camping on this lake, and on the other side of the mountain there was a fire, right? It was dry year. There was a huge fire on the other side of the mountain. This is Canada Day. We went there. And there was these immigrants out of Vancouver that we were surrounded by. There was like 5 or 6 different camps of them. And there's a lot of homeless living in the forest. This is happening in cities too. There's a lot of homeless living in the forests in the cities, and there's fires all over the place because of it. But anyways, so on Canada Day, surrounded by these immigrants who do not have the same care and sense. And the reason I say this is because one thing I've noticed with the uptick of immigrants is the uptick of litter, destruction of natural environment, and then what I'm about to talk about. And when I say that is like, you used to be able to go camping out in BC in random places and it'd be beautiful and pristine. Nowadays, you go out there and there is trash everywhere. And not only is there trash, but you'd have entire areas around rivers and lakes and stuff completely destroyed. And they go there, they destroy them, they don't clean up after themselves, and they leave. But this scenario, Canada Day, everyone's smart enough. There's fire bans to the nines, complete maximum fire bans, and there's a fire right across the lake from us as we're camping, and we knew we were safe because there was a lot of communication regarding that fire. It was under control, but it was there. And on that day, you're camping in the woods, mind you. It's not a clear area. It's next to a lake, but they're in the woods. There's no like beach area or anything like that. And on the night of Canada Day, these immigrants, they set off fireworks all night long. And we tried to go over there and give them shit for doing it. But then they, turned into this, heated thing where it's like, oh, this is our country, and get out. You don't like what we do. This is our country now, so you got to get the fuck out of here, kind of thing. Pardon my language. But that's something that's said often when you confront people like that. They claim that the country's now theirs and that, we don't belong, and et cetera, et cetera. But anyways, yeah, I'll never forget it. It's just all night long. Just setting off fireworks in the middle of a fire ban when there's a fire across the lake from us. Just no consideration or no knowledge when it comes to that kind of thing. But anyways, I digress. I like to say that because that's the end of that rant. Is that it for climate change? That's my thoughts on climate change. We can talk about something else. I don't really know if I have anything else to talk about today, to be honest, unless you guys have something you want to talk about. When I came on I initially wanted this to be a pretty quick one because like I said, I'm feeling pretty sick. Although this has been a nice distraction, I gotta say. Chat's been kind of quiet. Anyone else got anything they want to talk about? How long is this? It's been going on for an hour and 22. Man, that went quick. Anyone there? When I laugh, I cough. Plenish our forests so they can absorb carbon again. Critical Chris Fan 2.0 is there. Is there anything you guys would like to discuss? I do have a lot of topics that I plan on covering next week, but nothing that I prepared for today. I initially, honestly, was just going to talk about the committee thing because to me that was pretty huge, and we've gone over that now. So you guys are now aware of what's going on with the ethics committee and Mark Carney. What's his face? Cut Cub was talking about hockey earlier. I guess we could transition away from politics for a couple of minutes if you guys want to do that. But I don't know. Let's hear. Anyone have any opinions? Anyone have anything they want to say? Is there anything that you guys have heard this week that you'd like me to touch on or talk about? I'd be willing to talk about Trump too. I love talking about the U.S. Or we can go back to animals. I'll spend 2 hours talking about orcas if you want me to talk about that. But otherwise, we can just call it for the day. I think we had a good chat today. In the future, guys, don't be afraid to call in either. I got the Discord pinned. So if there's anyone that would like to call in and chat with me, keep the conversation going. That's always welcome, encouraged even. Can I get ones for who's even here? We got Critical Chris Fan and Maiden Lansard. It says I got 5 viewers right now, but chat kind of quieted down a minute ago. Got Cubs back. We got Cynthia Carruthers. Thank you guys all for coming out to listen. I appreciate that. Nothing else you guys want to chat about? Are we all okay with calling it for today then? So I can get back to sweating in bed. like I said, next week I'll try and get back to my regular schedule for videos being released. Be more consistent. And then same thing with the lives. Over time, I do want to have more lives, and I will have. What I want to do really badly is I want to get to debating with some liberals, really badly. I've been trying to entice them on X to come and talk to me, but they always. I'll check what you sent right now. As soon as people love to talk crap. When they're on X, especially when they're using accounts that are. Good night, Cynthia. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, they love to talk crap when they're on X on fake accounts where you don't know who they are and stuff, and they have these positions that they don't substantiate. And then I don't even engage too often, to be honest. What I do is I just tell them, come and talk to me in person. Come join my call. And I'm not doing that for views. I mean, I got what, an average of 5-6 people watching me. I don't care about the views, but you want to chat, let's chat. I'll go with you all night long via conversation, but as soon as I do that, they never engage. One person I wanted to get, who I actually managed to get a response from one time, was Aaron O'Toole this week, and but he never engaged. He responded once to me, and I thought I had him, but nah. I would love to chat with him. He's a conservative. He used to be the leader of the Conservative Party, and I can't stand the guy. Can't stand his politics, can't stand his policies, can't stand his positions on things, but couldn't get him. Unfortunately, that would have been a fun one. But yeah, hopefully in the future I can get some good debates and keep you guys entertained for a while. Plus, that allows us to just kind of get to the truth of things. One thing I was going to debate with someone about was the history of Canada and whether or not we're a multicultural country historically. Canada and multiculturalism. There was one individual who said that Canada's always historically been a multicultural melting pot. And this person supposedly has, a PhD in neuroscience or whatever and stuff. I thought it was so funny because they just said that Canada was a multicultural melting pot. And it's like, that's a kind of a contradiction. But also, there's never been a claim that Canada's a melting pot. Historically, that's not a term that was used for Canada. That's an American concept, not a Canadian concept. And but I really wanted to get into that one, but they never bit. Unfortunately, I was hoping they'd come on tonight, to be honest, because that would have been a fun one to talk about Canada's cultural history and how it's a myth that they teach you in school, even that we've always been a multicultural country. We haven't. And I don't think multiculturalism works, by the way. I'm a big believer that it doesn't work. I'm not saying that you can't have multiple people from different cultures living in a country. That's not what I'm saying. That's two different things. But multiculturalism as an idea, as a concept, doesn't work. And anywhere it's been applied, it's failed. As we're seeing now in Canada, as it's being pushed. And as people are being taught that it's our history, it's not. Again? What do you mean again? Again. Anyways, I think we did pretty good today. Talked a lot longer than I thought I would. So I appreciate you guys coming out. If no one else has anything else they want to talk, actually, we'll touch on hockey. Cut Cub wanted to talk about hockey, so I think I know who Cut Cub is. I thought it was someone else. Now I think I know who it is. Yeah, I don't think McDavid is the greatest player in the world, and I don't think that Bouchard is the best defender in the league. But I do see how there could be an argument made for him winning the Norris this year. I'll give him that much. But I don't think he's the best defender in the league. He's having a good year, though. Or he was having a good year. Playoffs, they're... speaking of which, Oilers are playing right now. Stanley is the best defender. Well, we all know where Critical Chris fan lives. Buffalo, obviously. No, yeah. Oilers are. I don't think they make it out of the second round, if they even make it out of the first round. Jets are falling apart because of the Stanley trade. I think the Jets had issues long before the Stanley trade. But yeah, good, nice thought there. Yeah, I don't know. I think the Oilers' biggest mistake of the year was trading Skinner for Jari. I watch a lot of Penguins games historically just because I'm a huge Sidney Crosby fan. Don't really care about what happens with the Penguins, but I always root for Sidney Crosby's success and want him to do well. And because of that, I've seen a lot of Jari games over the years. And I've been saying for years that I think he is a crap goalie. And I've said for years that I think that the Penguins would do much better without him. And lo and behold, well, no, so that's the thing. So lo and behold, Penguins went from a last place team, or one of the worst teams in the league, struggling. Last year there was talks about them, vying for a draft pick to essentially, well, they made the playoffs this year. Now they're struggling in the playoffs. However, that's not Skinner's fault. Skinner's been playing fantastic. And Edmonton is not even playing Jari. I've been saying for years he's an AHL goalie, but for some reason teams just like him. And yeah, Jari sucks. And that was, in my opinion, that was the biggest mistake that the Oilers made, was trading away Skinner for Jari. If you're gonna trade away a goalie, at least trade for a goalie that's got some skills. But yeah, because of that, I don't think they're getting out of the second round, if they even get out of the first round. I guess we'll see how that progress goes today. I think puck drops in the next 20 minutes probably. So I'm actually gonna probably turn this chat off, and then I'm gonna go watch some Stanley Cup playoffs. So that being said, anything else, or are we good, guys? All right, cool. All right, we're gonna sign off here. Thank you very much for tuning in. To everyone who tuned in, appreciate you all. And I will see you guys next time. Until then, Chris out.